Welcome to a new episode of the Educators Clinic. And we have Rachel French with us. Hi, Rachel.
Hello, Hatem.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, most welcome. And our first question, as always, who is Rachel French?
Well, I am a full-time educational consultant specializing in concept-based inquiry. I've come all the way from New Zealand, so as you were just saying, other end of the earth really, or the end of the earth. It's quite a long way from anywhere. But really, my interest in concept-based inquiry began when I started teaching internationally in the IB programs, first in Brazil, and then in Egypt, which has a very special place in your heart, and then in Germany. So I've been an international educator for about 15 years before I returned back to New Zealand. And now I work full-time supporting schools who are implementing a concept-based inquiry approach. I work with a range of consultants from all over the world, and I'm Director of Professional Learning International.
So with that regards, what triggered your passion towards being an educator or a teacher?
Interesting. So my mother was a teacher, and she always said, don't become a teacher, you have lots of other opportunities. She came from a generation where it was sort of teacher or nurse were your only options. But I went to university not to become an educator, but all of the papers that I chose ended up being education and psychology papers, and I was really interested in becoming an educational psychologist, but then got into the classroom and didn't want to leave. So loved being in the classroom, supporting student learning, and then really found my passion for curriculum development and curriculum design. So I worked as an IB PYP coordinator before becoming a full-time consultant.
All right, so teaching and curriculum design. So are they two faces of the same coin?
Good question. They can be. But we have started as a company, Professional Learning International, really designing curriculum. And I've read an interesting article recently about the curriculum lottery. And I think a lot of teachers can be really good curriculum designers, but having the time to design curriculum is a huge challenge. And my daughter, when she was about 8 years old, said to me, "Mum, how does a teacher know what to write on the board?" And I said to her, "Well, that's an interesting question. Tell me more about that. What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, the teacher is with us all day. And in New Zealand schools, there's no specialist teachers at all. They really are with the students all day except for a lunch break. So how does she know what we're going to do the next day if they're with us all day?" And I think that's one of the big challenges in education, is that so much time is spent in the classroom. And by the end of the teaching day, having the time to then really design curriculum is a challenge. So I think teachers can write curriculum. They're capable. I think that we can support teachers. It's definitely a skill, and a skill like any other skill that has to be learned, and we can support teachers with that, but they can't write curriculum without really investing in the time to do that. And that's a huge challenge, because it's not just, an hour a week in a collaborative planning meeting. It's actually something that requires weeks. Over the last 5 years, we've been building out a concept-based inquiry mathematics project, and it was a 5-year journey to design a full maths project for all units for all grade levels with the learning engagements done. And most teachers in most schools don't have that kind of time. So I think we're seeing increasingly that there is a need for some forms of established curriculum that can support teachers and schools in speeding up that process, or in having quality curriculum in classrooms.
Right. So you've been teaching a curriculum that has been designed by someone other than you, and you've been teaching a curriculum that have been designed by you. What's the difference?
That's an interesting question. I think there's got to be a little bit of both. So to have a curriculum that has been done well, when then you take the time in making sure that you have the right resources available, that you understand the needs of that curriculum and that unit. When you design a curriculum yourself, if you've had the time to do it well, then obviously you've been thinking about specifically your school context and the group of students that you have in front of you, so you can refine it to those needs. But that doesn't mean that in a done-for-you curriculum that there aren't opportunities to be so prescriptive that you can't adapt and modify. The curriculum that we wrote, we described the learning experiences as suggested learning experiences. So the understandings are there for you. There's knowledge and skills written for teachers, but the learning experiences themselves are suggested. And that means that we still rely on teachers as professionals to make decisions and also to be able to, in the maths example, make connections to the other units that they're teaching. So in things like statistics, we say to teachers, here's a graph that you could use, but switch this out and choose one that's meaningful to the unit of inquiry that you're working on or something else that's meaningful in your school context.
And that's what takes time.
It does take time.
Right.
It does take time. Right. And so that's why we have one there. You can use this one if you don't have the time. If you've got something that's more relevant to your students, then build that in. And spending that time is worth doing, especially if you know that you're going to be teaching as part of your program of inquiry, for example. We're going to be teaching this unit every year. So let's take some time this year to make sure that our statistics and probability is integrated with whichever unit we see as the best fit.
Right.
But that's much smaller amount of time than having to plan every single maths lesson for the year.
Absolutely. And that's kind of like the discussion always going back and forth between, school administrations and teachers in terms of, okay, so we're going to work on these units and invest the time and effort and then move forward with a higher grade level or whatever. And then there will be another teachers coming in to teach the same grade level. They would also have their amendments on that unit that changes with time, with, for example, now the whole world is speaking about sustainable development. So how to align this and integrate it to our, unit planners. So the domains of the curriculum, of course, it's not entirely about the content and it's not entirely about the concepts. So we want to touch base about what is exactly concept-based inquiry from the perspective of the different multiple domains of a curriculum, which are all aligned to learning outcomes that are standardized all over the world. At the end of the day, we know what students need to know and do by the end of grade 12 so that they are university ready.
Yes.
But how does the concept-based inquiry then kick in and align that and add what to it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So in a two-dimensional curriculum, we think about knowledge and skills. And most learning outcomes in curriculums around the world are really focused on knowledge and skills. Some curriculums make an attempt to be more conceptual and they're adding conceptual understandings to that. But we really do want teachers to be able to clearly articulate the difference between knowledge and skills and conceptual understanding. And I think there's a big misconception out there that when we teach conceptually, the knowledge and skills aren't important anymore. Like we can Google that, the facts aren't important. We couldn't be further from the truth, actually. Knowledge and skills are essential in the concept-based curriculum in providing the foundation for understanding concepts and then conceptual relationships. One of the things that I have found with schools and national state departments, anyone who's writing a concept-based curriculum, is that they tend to come for professional learning when they're ready to implement it with teachers. And in actual fact, it's too late because so often the understanding of what is concept-based curriculum has not been consistent for the curriculum writers. So you won't get a consistent approach to conceptual understandings. You might have conceptual understandings in all curriculum areas, but because you've had different educators work on the maths curriculum, the literacy curriculum, the social studies curriculum, some are more conceptual than others. And so then you're trying to roll out a concept-based inquiry curriculum
horizontally
to educators when it's not actually necessarily all concept-based inquiry. There's a lot of facts that get mixed in with the understandings and a lot of conceptual understandings that gets mixed in with the facts. So for anyone who's really committed to developing a concept-based curriculum, whether it's at a school level or at a state level or at a national level, make sure that the educators who are writing that can first articulate consistently. You may have a different definition than I do, that's fine, but make sure that you have a consistent understanding of what is knowledge, what are skills, and what is an understanding, and what is the difference between those.
The 3 dimensions of the curriculum, 100%. So what is the difference between a CBI, a concept-based inquiry, curriculum development, and other forms of curriculum development from the perspective of, the design and instruction?
Yeah, so we have that third level, the level of conceptual understanding, and then use guiding questions as a way to support students in building understanding for themselves. So at the written curriculum level, we make sure that we articulate a progression of conceptual understandings, and that should really be done not just for each subject area, but for every subject area at every grade level. We need to be able to articulate the increase in complexity and specificity. So we've also seen curriculum developers who write 5 or 6 big ideas for math, and then all the knowledge and skills sits under that. And it gets called a concept-based curriculum because there's these 5 or 6 big ideas. But there's way more than 5 or 6 big ideas to mathematics. And if we want to teach students to understand and think conceptually, we need to be able to articulate what a 5-year-old should understand and how different that is from what a 10-year-old should understand, and even just how different it is from a 5 to a 6-year-old. So we need to be able to articulate that progression of understandings.
Mm-hmm. So it's basically increasing this layer of the third dimension of concepts in terms of the specificity as they grow up the child developmental stages. Mm-hmm. Brilliant. And what is the connection between the CBI, because you've mentioned giving it a bigger generalization so that you can align multiple subjects together, with the transdisciplinary approach or the interdisciplinary approach?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because a lot of schools who will ask me to come in and do a workshop with them actually think it's the same thing, that transdisciplinary learning is concept-based learning. And it actually couldn't be further from the truth, because a concept-based inquiry approach can be transdisciplinary, or it can be interdisciplinary, or it can be disciplinary. And we actually don't advocate for one approach. I don't believe that primary school should all be transdisciplinary. I think that there are times when we should use a transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary approach, and there are times when we should use a disciplinary approach, because trying to integrate everything just doesn't make sense in the curriculum. The number of times that I have seen a unit on the states of matter being integrated with place value in mathematics. And those two things are just not alike, but teachers have to teach place value and they have to teach states of matter. So they're trying to find a way to push the two together. In actual fact, we're not doing justice to the students. Really what we're doing is watering down both units by trying to put them into one curriculum unit.
It shouldn't be forced.
Right.
It should come seamlessly.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, we need to be able to ask the question, do these topics work together? Will the mathematics support or enhance the understanding of learning about states of matter or ecosystems or migration? If I'm learning about something like migration, I might not need to draw on mathematics very much, but I really will need English language arts or literacy skills in that migration unit. So there's a really powerful link there. But that doesn't mean that the maths teacher or the art teacher or the music teacher or the PE teacher, the number of times we see the poor PE teacher sitting through these meetings being asked to find connections, when in actual fact, they'd be better off teaching a concept-based and inquiry-based unit on basketball skills or something that they really need to teach for PE. So I think sometimes in schools all over the world, we're pushing integration where there is none, really.
Right.
And so I definitely don't want the pendulum to swing back the other way and lose the power of integrated curriculum, because it does save so much time to be able to have students spending their literacy time reading about something and then use their time to write about something, and then still have time in social studies or unit of inquiry time to delve into that deeper or conduct interviews or do hands-on experiments or whatever that is. There is some really powerful integrations between mathematics and other content areas, and we should be leveraging that. But there is content where we actually have to get to a certain level of understanding before we can make those real-world connections. So let's not force the fit.
So the project-based learning, I think the main approach of that is to basically align what is happening in the classroom to real-life situations.
Yes.
Like we all hear the term holistic education. And classroom without walls, and education for sustainable development, and all of that stuff. So accordingly, it might be that purpose. So if it's not happening, then maybe not force it. And can it happen in a disciplinary approach when it needs to be, like the PE example that you've mentioned? So I totally agree on that. And maybe if you can expand a little bit on, is it applicable to apply project-based learning on the concept-based inquiry approach?
Yeah, absolutely.
To what extent?
Yeah, the two can really work hand in hand, because a lot of project-based learning is about making those real-world connections, being able to find meaningful action, and a concept-based inquiry approach really works well with that, because a concept-based inquiry approach is really about helping students understand the problem or issue. If you're going to take meaningful action, you first have to have a deep understanding of what the problem or issue was. So there's a great example. I used to work at Frankfurt International School, and a dear friend of mine, Gail, was working as a mentor on the PYP exhibition, and the student that she was working with was studying the refugee crisis as part of his PYP exhibition. And he thought that his action would be to do a toy drive, to get toys for all of the refugees that had recently arrived in Germany. But as he did his research, he interviewed a social worker and found out that actually the children had lots of donated toys. The biggest problem was social isolation.
Wow.
So instead, the kind of project that he then developed or worked on was inviting those students up for a football game. And he invited a whole team, and then he got a team from his own class. He made sure that there were both boys and girls in that team, so that he could make sure that the visiting team had, felt comfortable. And then he said, it's not going to be us versus them. We're going to mix it up so that they get to play on, we're going to, all play together effectively. And so to me, that really reflects how concept-based does support a project-based learning approach. In order to solve a problem, you have to first understand it.
Absolutely. And inquiry is driving this as well, because according to that inquiry that he did, he changed and he shifted flexibility to the product as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have concept-based curriculum and we have inquiry-based teaching and learning. And then concept-based inquiry brings both. And you have a famous Venn diagram that has the intersection. Can they delve deeper into this?
Sure. So you can teach through inquiry without teaching concepts, and you can also use a concept-based approach without utilizing inquiry. So a concept-based approach is teaching for transferable understanding. And using an inquiry approach, we are utilizing questions to drive inquiry. And they can be questions on the part of the teacher or the student questions, but we're utilizing questions as a way of supporting students in building those understandings. So this is where inductive learning comes into play. And this was one of the biggest aha moments when I started to follow the work of Dr. Lynn Erickson. Because I came from an IB background where I was that PYP coordinator saying, hey, make sure we can see your central idea on the wall. It's really important to display your central idea. And I realize now that we were robbing students of the opportunity to do the thinking. So in a deductive approach, we do just that. We display the central idea, we unpack it together, we help students to understand what it means, and then we spend the rest of our inquiry time proving that what the teacher told us is true. However, the IB does not require a deductive approach. They say that you can use inductive or deductive. And utilizing an inductive approach is so much more powerful. It gives us this opportunity to use guiding questions to help students see patterns and make connections, and then they articulate the understanding towards the end of the unit in their own words. And to me, at the heart of IB programs is student agency. And student agency is all about voice, choice, and ownership. And to me, when we think about voice and ownership, there's nothing greater than owning the understanding, right? Wow. It's not just my teacher's understanding that I've proved is correct. Okay, so the teacher told me that, and oh yeah, they were right. It's actually, hey, this is my understanding and I own that. And I think that's just such an incredible transformation in the classroom.
Absolutely. And to see this as, a teacher / curriculum designer to see your learners reaching this point that you have, worked your
Yeah.
so you can reach this outcome and to see that they are coming to it with your learning strategy. I think there is no better feeling than that.
It's so exciting. I will never forget once this little boy who he wasn't that little, he was about 10. He had built this understanding about maths, and it was something about the infinite nature of fractions. And he just sat back in his chair and went, mind blown. And you could see, like, the thinking was, you know how you can imagine steam coming out his ears? You could just see, like, whoa, I had no idea. And that, to me, that's the ultimate in education. Like, he owned that learning. And, how exciting is that when we're getting that reaction in maths?
That's the best recognition ever for teachers, 100%. So you've mentioned the comparison here behind, in between the lines between the IB understanding and the CBI understandings, plural. So we can expand on that.
Sure. So again, another aha moment. I can't take credit for this. It was Dr. Lynn Erickson who challenged my thinking around this. In the IB, we have one understanding, or we're required to have one understanding. In the PYP, that's in the form of a central idea. In the MYP, that's in the form of our statement of inquiry. But we typically have units that last for 6 to 8 weeks. And our students are capable of coming up with more than one understanding in 6 to 8 weeks. If we think a topic is important enough to spend 6 to 8 weeks on it, we should be able to articulate more than one understanding. Once you understand that, you just can't look back.
So a statement of inquiry, if it's only one in terms of CBI terminology, it's the generalization. I have seen multiple teachers trying to pop into multiple concepts and some global context so that it is as much as possible encompassing every kind of single fact and piece of knowledge that will be taught throughout the 6 to even 8 weeks, which eventually leads to a statement that is not even accessible and understandable by the teachers, by fellow colleague teachers rather than the students themselves. So the accessibility of these generalizations now isn't that important.
Yeah, well, I am glad you mentioned that, because that's the other power of having 5 to 9 understandings, right? Of course, our students are capable of more than one, but when we have to summarize an entire unit in one understanding, it becomes such a hash up of ideas that it becomes a little meaningless. And so we do unpack some of all of that, and we don't have to say it all in one idea. So we can get much more specific, much more micro in the concepts. We're not bound by trying to pack in key concepts, global context. We can actually, of course, use those, but across our understandings. And so the understandings are much more meaningful and give teachers much greater clarity and intent. So intent, I think, is one of the biggest words that I hear over and over again when teachers are planning in this way. They say, so much more intentional.
Yes.
And a lot of teachers don't love spending hours planning, but when they feel that that planning is actually going to direct their teaching and it's meaningful, it's not just filling in boxes to document it for someone somewhere else who needs you to document it. It's actually giving them clarity on, this is what I'll teach tomorrow. Then that's so much more likely to get teacher buy-in.
Yeah, 100%.
In terms of that this time is deserved, the time out of the classroom. Because teachers don't want to be out of the classroom. If they do, then they shouldn't be teaching anymore, right? But they'll take that time to be out of classroom if it can get them to be a better teacher when they're back in the classroom.
Right. And the perspective of a teacher as a facilitator of learning rather than a teacher, in terms of a teacher-centered approach or in terms of an actually student-led approach. So the more time I invest outside of the classroom preparing for that lesson, the more invisible I will be in the classroom, but my impact will be very well visible and seen as well. But that again gets us back to the dilemma of the time.
Yes.
And we know that the one single thing that teachers don't have much of is time.
Yes.
And preparation for a lesson is a thing rather than preparation then for a whole unit. So accordingly, what are the tools that can help teachers delve into the planning in a way, whether it is driven by the school administration, collaborative time slots that are scheduled and timetabled moving forward, so that this is really reviewed? Because again, a unit can be very, aligned with what I'm teaching now, but it cannot be a year after or a year after, and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
I think the biggest thing is giving teachers time. And to me, that has to be something that we rethink and be far more realistic about how long it takes to plan a really good unit. I would say for me to plan a unit that I would be proud to put out there, it would take at least 3 days if I had a really good team who invested in that. That doesn't mean realistically that we can give all teachers 3 days to plan every unit that they teach. I understand that. But I would say when units are new to teachers, giving them at least a full day to be able to articulate what do you want them to understand, what's the questions that you'll use to drive that learning, what's the knowledge and skills that are going to support that, then they can utilize those hour-long blocks to actually dive in and think about the learning engagements and prepare. Teachers work really hard. It's not that they're saying they're not going to work after 3 or work hard. Most teachers I know end up doing work in the weekend as well. So we've got to honor their time and say, if you want me to write a unit, I can, but give me the time to do that. And I've worked with schools who've said, oh yeah, we've released teachers for a day. Great, 1 day in a year is not going to get your curriculum written, right? So I think we just have to be a lot more realistic about that in terms of how long does it really take. And I've also heard from schools who say, oh, we've got a new principal and we have to rewrite our whole curriculum this year. Well, you can't necessarily, if you've got teachers working full time, write your curriculum in every subject area in a year. So being realistic with teachers about how long it takes. So, I've worked in schools where the curriculum for one subject took 2 years. Now the challenge with that, and actually the reason that I started the maths project all those years ago, was that I just came out of a situation where we'd spent 2 years refining a maths curriculum and then we went straight into literacy. So we had our understandings, knowledge and skills, which had taken us the 2 years to develop in the, once a week staff meeting and a couple of release days. But then we started literacy. We didn't have any learning engagements planned, right? We've got an entire maths curriculum and it sort of can go on the shelf. And here you go, teachers, here's your curriculum. It's brand new. But now we're writing literacy. So we're going to be busy with that. Yeah. And the teachers don't have the time to really...
So we mentioned the deductive and inductive approaches to teaching and sharing the generalization or the statement of inquiry or the central idea in the beginning of a lesson, in the middle of a lesson, in the end of the lesson. But we also mentioned how big of an aha moment it is to the teacher to see their learners reaching it at their own pace, with their own understanding, maybe even with their own words. Can you delve deep into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of research, I think, of Hati's research on sharing learning outcomes at the beginning of the unit. But I believe there's a more powerful way, and that is not to share learning outcomes, but to flip those outcomes and think about the intent of why we're sharing them, right? We need to make the path of learning clear for students. Students need to be aware from the beginning of the lesson what they should be expecting to focus on in that lesson, what they should be expecting
Visible
to achieve.
Learning.
Right. But I think we can do that through questions. And instead of sharing learning outcomes, we share guiding questions. So by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to answer these questions. Or by the end of this unit, you'll be able to answer these questions. And one of the things that we can do right at the beginning of the unit is share some of our conceptual questions. However, if our students can answer those conceptual questions right at the beginning of the unit, then we shouldn't be teaching it. I think, too often we have these ideas about what our students should understand, but we're selling our students short. We're not pitching high enough on those understandings. And that's another question that I ask teachers all the time when I'm coaching and supporting them in writing lesson plans or unit plans. Is that something that your students would already understand? And you'll be surprised the number of times they say, oh, yes, actually they do understand that. So why are we making that one of the few precious 5 to 9 understandings in a unit if they already understand it? So that's something to really watch out for, to say.
Because we're forcing it, because we're focusing on the facts rather than the understandings, the knowledge rather than the understanding.
Yeah.
Wow. So I want to now maybe switch the discussion towards the assessment. Because if we are focusing on what students need to understand by the end of this specific unit, and accordingly we are listing a list of generalizations which have multiple macro and micro concepts. So now, switching to assessment, if we understand the three domains of the curriculum, what students need to know, what students need to understand, or what students need to do, which comes to the skills, whether cognitive or metacognitive, how does that reflect meaningfully in a well-designed assessment that is not just an MCQ or pick and choose or whatever, that's just focusing on knowing and understanding? Isn't that a challenge as well? And should it be, the next part of the question, planned, the assessment, I mean, before teaching the unit or during or after, and what difference does it make?
Well, actually, when it comes to assessment, one of the most powerful opportunities for assessment is when students form the understanding themselves, and the transfer phase, which is when they can justify that by either talking about other areas where other examples of that, so that would be your knowledge. So think about a new example that we haven't explored. How does what you understand apply there? So they're able to transfer that learning. Or in the case of skills, apply it in their own work. So you demonstrated that you could understand this, but now I'd like you to write a persuasive piece and show me that you can actually include your understanding or demonstrate your understanding when you write your own persuasive piece. Because it's one thing to say that you understand it, but actually to do that and transfer it in your own writing.
Or implement in unrehearsed situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that too often we spend long amounts of time on summative assessment tasks, when in actual fact, writing a generalization can be as quick as 5 minutes. And that generalization is a snapshot of what students understand. And we're not utilizing that enough in classrooms. That can be an exit ticket. It's not a big summative assessment, but the beautiful thing about that is if you've got 3 or 4 students who you realize don't yet understand whatever it was that you were aiming for, you've still got time before the end of the unit to address that, to work with a small group of students, to ask a different question, to introduce some new case studies to help them build understanding. So I'm a big fan of being able to use checklists to kind of mark off when students have demonstrated knowledge or skills, to having students write understandings and keeping those understandings as evidence of their assessment. I love students to have their own learning portfolios where they're recording all of their understandings, but not just the understandings, also proving each one.
Now we are obsessed about AI,
Yes.
machine learning, ChatGPT, you name it. And of course, when it comes to part of it, academic honesty, and to what extent are we making sure that students' transfer of knowledge or understanding and or is their own work or not. And of course, we were just mentioning now assessments. To what extent does it affect, whether positively or negatively, the transfer of ideas and generalizations and understandings, if that can be happening in a platform that is a digital one, in terms of asynchronous or synchronous at the student's own learning, of course, depending on the child developmental stages as well. Have you thought about that in maybe the math curriculum that you're working on or others? Because I know that it sits on a platform currently. So if we can expand on that.
Do you mean in terms of students utilizing AI and teachers not being aware of their use of AI?
I mean in terms of being able to transfer the conceptual understanding through an online platform.
Okay.
So online teaching. To what extent is, curriculum design will be different
Yes.
because the platform is different, the outcome will be different.
Well, I've heard you talk before about this idea of blended learning, and I think that we can do a lot online, and I think there's some really powerful opportunities. The idea of flipped classroom has been around for quite a long time now, and if we're thinking about blended learning, using that flipped classroom approach to get students to do their investigation, but also online learning also doesn't necessarily have to mean by yourself anymore. there's beautiful opportunities to learn online but still work collaboratively through breakout sessions, through coming together, through still having discussions. And I think that if we leverage that effectively, we can combine both time when students are working independently at a time of day and in a place in the world that works for them, but also times when we can come together online. Humans are social beings, right? We're social creatures. So having the opportunities to discuss ideas, to challenge each other's thinking, can still be done through digital platforms if we can find ways for students and teachers to come together for discussions, to answer questions, to share ideas, to push each other's thinking.
Right. And it also, I think it comes to the age appropriateness, and it comes to also the surroundings and the environment, because we have seen a lot of transfer for multiple trainings, including the CBI itself, from face-to-face to online, and it actually has maybe even introduced more rigor and introduced more reading time and introduced more at your own pace, so that you can delve into the literature a little bit more than just a 1 week or a 2 weeks workshop. That's brilliant. How can people who are interested in CBI learn more about it?
Well, I think we, as Professional Learning International, try to provide lots of different access points. So every month we have a free masterclass, which gives people an opportunity to just come together and focus on a specific topic. We also have online learning and face-to-face workshops available. But one of the things I'm proudest about the way, in terms of the online learning that we do, is really moving away from traditional approaches to online learning where you do lots and lots of reading, to all of our courses are taught through video modules where you watch videos self-paced and then you come together in a Zoom room. But the most powerful part of online learning for me has been an opportunity to have one-on-one coaching. And whenever we have a workshop, the workshops that I've just done here have 80 people in them. But when we do a workshop online, we might have 80 people, but I still meet with each and every one of them individually for coaching. And so being able to have that one-on-one coaching when the unit planner has been finished, which is another thing, in 2 days while you're learning, you're not going to get through a whole unit planner. You give teachers the time to finish the unit planner, and then you can have one-on-one coaching. So the online workshops that we do provide that. And then we recently started the Concept-Based Inquiry Collaborative, which is a really exciting opportunity to explore different forms of professional learning. All of our collaborative members have access to all of our online courses that they can do at their own pace, but they have access to a call every week with one of our specialist teams where they can join, ask questions, share learning, or just come along and listen to what others are talking about. And we have one-on-one coaching calls as part of that.
Brilliant.
And then, as you know, we also have the trainer certification, because you've been certified as a concept-based curriculum and instruction trainer. That certification program was developed by Dr. Erickson and Lanning, and it was a way of continuing their work and certifying trainers to work all over the world. That's why I'm here in Saudi Arabia, not sitting at home in New Zealand, is the opportunity to become a full-time consultant. So now I lead that trainer certification program.
Lovely. And the conference as well.
And we have a conference,
the annual conferences.
The conference this year will be in Singapore, but we try and move it around the world to different places. And the special thing about our conference, I also wanted to plan that as a conference like no other conference, because a big part of it, we called it the Learning Labs, because the conference spends quite a bit of time where you go in and you become a student in the classroom, and giving teachers the opportunity to sit as a student in another educator's classroom and learn through a concept-based approach. And then in those lessons, they'll debrief how they use case studies, how they use questions, the teaching strategies that we used, so that teachers can go back and implement that in their classroom. So that's always a lot of fun. It's also an opportunity when we do so much online to bring people together to be in one place. And
absolutely. Learning labs. That's a lovely word.
Yes.
In the Educator's Clinic.
In the Educator's Clinic, indeed.
So, last but not least, a message from Rachel French, generically zooming out from concept-based into the realm of education at large, to educators across the world, and specifically maybe in the Middle East now that you are here.
My message would be your students are capable of more than you think. And so give them the opportunity to do the thinking, to see patterns and make connections, because that is so empowering and will give students an incredible sense of accomplishment. So step back and let your students do the thinking.
Wonderful. Rachel French, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Hatem. It is such a pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you. And this was the Educators Clinic.